Hey everyone, so recently Gacha Interact invited several content creators including me, Jstern, Flip, and Red Warrior together to talk about the potential and feasibility of buffing character kits in Genshin, as Hoyo has already done so in Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone Zero. So we had a pretty long, thoughtful, and fun discussion about the topic of character buffs, as well as delving into the big power creep issue that Genshin is currently facing, the existing ways that Genshin has attempted to counteract this power creep, and the future implications of this power creep as we head into Nod-Krai. Gacha Interact has uploaded their edited version on their channel, but I am also uploading our talk here as a more raw and extended version of the footage from my perspective with little to no editing. So if you're interested in listening into our entire discussion, treat this video like a podcast. A big thanks to Gacha Interact for organizing this and inviting me, as well as the other creators for taking the time to join, as I appreciated meeting and talking with them all in call. And with that, I hope you enjoy this discussion.
Hey everyone, my name's Rift, and of course, as usual, I'm joined with Vixen, the co-partner on Gacha Interact. And today I'm joined by Jstern up in my top left, at least for me. We've also got Red Warrior and Dad and Flip on YouTube. So very happy to have them on for this interesting discussion. And of course, you already saw the title of the video. We're going to be talking about a long thought about question of will Genshin actually buff characters eventually? Because it's just been talked about for a while. We've seen Honkai Star Rail already implementing this, and even Zenless also has implemented this as well with characters like Elle and Zhou, and it's been really, really awesome to say the least. I really like it. So the question now that everyone's thinking is Genshin going to do this too? Are they going to hop on board? So with that being the topic of the video, let's dive right in. So one of the first major questions surrounding this topic is, should Genshin even buff the characters? Should they not do it? But I guess, Vixen, starting with you, do you think Genshin should do this? I mean, the other games have done it, Honkai, Zenless, like I mentioned. What do you think?
I think it's an interesting question because it's been something like you said that some of the other games have talked about and looked at to do as well. We've seen it with a lot of other games how they've kind of brought back either old mechanics, old ideas to try to bring back old characters. But obviously, with Genshin kind of being the forerunner, they haven't had a need to do anything new. Usually, they just kind of have been in the front, so it's been almost no need to do so. To do it, I don't know if they, whether or not we'll jump into other questions later about, will they, would they, all those other questions. But the question of should they, I don't know. I think that it would be a good idea just to get either some good help from some old characters and old things. But I don't know if it's also a good idea on another hand, because you have an issue that can come up with maybe some ideas with future characters not being a need to be really pulled anymore. If you buff a character, let's say just pulling out a character like Raiden, if you had buffed her originally, does that mean that a character like Varessa now coming out becomes practically useless? There's just certain things in certain teams, especially that I think could be messed with if you do it. So it's kind of a 50-50 in my brain on whether or not they should. I lean just because I want more characters to be buffed, especially with a lot more of the end game coming out, some new things dropping, as well as with the Abyss, sometimes being here and there a little bit more difficult. Having some of the old units just be a little bit stronger could be helpful for more people to clear more end game, maybe more consistently. But I mean, without my own 2 cents on it, what is kind of everybody else's thought? I guess we could jump over to Jay's turn in the top left corner. Kind of your thoughts.
So, I actually have to disagree a little bit. Genshin has a pretty long history of buffing characters. They don't do it in the X character has a fundamental damage increase as much as they release new mechanics, new teammates, new gearing that do significantly buff characters. If we want to go all the way back to 2.0, they introduced Shimenawa's Reminiscence and Emblem of Severed Fate. These are sets that significantly buffed characters like Xingqiu, Shanling, Hu Tao. These were great sets that buffed existing characters. 2.0 or 2.1 also introduced the Catch, which again was a buff for existing polearm characters that use energy recharge. So they had a 4-star weapon option besides Favlance. It's effectively what you would be using otherwise. In Fontaine, we saw Chevreuse, who directly buffed Overload. This last year, we also saw direct increases to Overload and Electrocharged in their transformative damage multipliers. Shatter and Superconduct as well, and Swirl all the way back in 1.6. So it's not like they haven't buffed characters. We even
more
just
like
saw Escoffier, who made Cryo an element again.
Thank you,
You're not wrong.
Escoffier.
You're not wrong there.
With
Yeah.
the as team slots become more and more limited, as best in slot teams start to become completely cemented in stone, that's where you start running out of places to improve characters, and that's when characters need numerical buffs. The other thing about that is, since the end of Sumeru, they have essentially done a roster reboot every year where all of your DPSs get swapped out for new ones that are just strictly better, if you know what I mean. And from that extent, if they want the older characters to be competitive, they do need the numerical increases.
So
You
I
can
guess
jump in
the
at any time.
I about to say, I think the
Yeah.
biggest thing would then be, you know, should they act? So I'm guessing, I guess what we're getting at is they probably shouldn't. So I guess they've in the past done like you've been talking about. They've, I mean, introducing, and I know this means practically nothing for this specific character because it did not do well. But characters like Mika, who helped Eula in that instance, and being that type of character, a character like Yansan, who kind of even helped with maybe the idea of bringing another character outside of a character like Bennett to be an attack buffer, like an actual good attack buffer for more consistent help. You also have another character, like mainly like you were talking about with Chevrolet, who brought in Overload. The only other character that actually had a direct change, and I once again correct me if I'm wrong, would have been Zhongli when he initially released,
Yes.
and they switched around his kit. Now, because he's an Archon and everything, you know, that probably has its own reasons. I guess the question should be, should that happen again? And if, you know, what would that, you know, should they do that?
The Zhongli situation is primarily driven by nationalism, if you weren't aware. Zhongli is the god of leeway. He's the Chinese god in Genshin Impact. So him being a weak character prompted pretty widespread outrage.
That
Ah.
that's fair.
It's not necessarily that he's an Archon, it's that he's the Chinese Archon.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, and that makes sense. So I guess then so I guess you know, once again, I mean, now that we've kind of got, you know, at least the top row on our end, I guess, you know, we'll just run right into red. I guess, what do you think? Should they, you know, they've quote unquote done it in the past. They've either done it directly, indirectly with other characters by bringing in artifacts or other units that are supportive for them, like new 4 stars. What are you thinking? What's your 2 cents on that topic?
At this point, Powercreep has gotten to the point where you kind of want to give characters those actual numerical increases on top of the indirect buffs. Speaking of Zhongli, are you familiar with what they did exactly?
Well, I know they changed his weapon. Though the weapon, I'm not sure if the weapon changed, but I believe that at least his actual kit had a different change. But I mean, yeah, please go
I
more
want
into
to
depth on that.
give someone else a chance to talk. Does anyone remember original Zhongli?
Original, no, but I know he got HP
Nope.
scaling on his normals after his buff,
I was gonna
which
say.
was pretty huge because I used him as my main DPS at the beginning of the game, and that dude destroyed for like overworld stuff. And
Good
then
old
like,
days.
they increased his
I think
shield by 150, I think, or to 150 absorption.
So
Y-
there were a couple
I think-
sets of changes.
Flip, did you still want to say
oh.
something? Sorry, I thought I heard him.
Sorry, Flip.
I mean, I think I remember a decent amount of what they changed.
All right, go
just-
for it.
All right, you'll see how correct I am. For starters, when he did his hold skill, he didn't summon the pillar. His pillar was only summoned by the tap skill, and the whole skill only did the shield. So you kind of had to choose one or another, which was very weird.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I'll get back to it if I'm incorrect. But there was also like no interruption resistance on his hold skill either, so it was very easy to like get staggered out of it.
Just like Baiju is
Um,
currently.
Yes. Then Geo shields in general were only, I think they were like other shields to where they were 250% to their element. So like he didn't have the universal 150% damage absorption. So his shield was also like quite weak, unless it was against geo attacks. And I think there was something to do with his energy, but I don't remember.
The energy is because of the pillar.
Oh yeah. But that's all I remember off the top of my head.
Didn't
There was
they
like some other
Did they
minor
give
things.
Sorry,
the
did
red
they?
shred?
Yeah, I was about to, was that added? I
pretty
don't
sure
Yes.
remember.
Oh yeah, that too.
Oh, they added the 20% red shred. They reworked Georesonance to include 20% Geo-resistant shred. They reworked all Geo shields instead of being 250% to Geo, 150% to all efficiency. They changed Zhongli's Ascension passive. Before, the HP scaling was only on his Elemental Burst. They made it apply to his Elemental Skill and to his normal attacks. And I think they also slightly increased it. I think it's 33 now, and it was 30 for the burst. Not sure about that one. You mentioned the pillar versus the hold. Yes, that's correct. He didn't have interruption resistance, and he didn't place the pillar when he summoned the shield. But the interesting thing is, two of those major changes were universal systems that technically buffed other characters like Noelle. The change to Geo-Resonance was great for Geo teams. It gave them a resonance. They did something similar in 3.0. If you don't know, until 3.0, Hydro Resonance was 15%
Oh my
healing
gosh.
efficiency.
Yeah, I
We all
remember
hated that.
Yeah, in 3.0, they buffed it to be 25% HP. This was for Yelan and Hu Tao, and similar teams in the future.
And
And that was a really necessary change to make that resonance great.
Crowd resonance is coming up, I believe.
Yeah, I hope.
Animo resonance change one.
We can only hope.
Maybe.
So, I mean, there have been a lot of changes, I guess, at the end of the day, in terms of outside effects, right? So, I guess going back to that original question, should they buff? Because at this point, we've already kind of now gone to the point of they kind of have, and indirectly in different ways, with different, obviously with Zhongli and the different cases he's done. Obviously, resonances have changed, outside numerical, everything else has changed, numerical values with things like overload and electric charge.
Yeah,
So, going back to that question, Red, kind of, what do you think? What's your actual thoughts on this?
I think characters like Miss Coffee are a band-aid. I don't like it sometimes when they just are, yeah, now the whole entire game is buffed. Because if you buff a pyro character like Kutao, the character that was behind her a little bit, Yoimiya, you'll buy a lot at that point, HP buff and stuff. But she's been left in the dust since 3.0. She hasn't gotten anything. This character is very sad to look at. She just sat there and she's not doing nothing. Like, I don't want to use that character. She's weak. Like, I loved her when she came out because she was strong. Power creep happened. Not strong no more. Never used again. I think direct buff needs to happen.
Okay, so yeah, it kind of brings the idea of like some of those old units, especially with pyro DPSs. I mean, now with Mavuika, Arelcchino, and Hu Tao, there's zero reason. I mean, I was also one to grab Yoimiya when she came around, and it's the same thing for me. I mean, she's collected so much dust on my account, it's disgusting. So certain obviously things on that front. So at least that's how we see that idea. Obviously you have other elements that could obviously be talked about the same way. Characters who, even upon release, almost felt a little bit not as strong. Characters like Ayato and stuff like that that were really good, or maybe they had like a really cool idea with a niche and very maybe quickly fell off, or other units came out that almost instantaneously just got in the way, or maybe they were never there in the first place. So yeah, okay, some interesting thoughts on maybe how it's just been constant band-aids with new characters to just fix things for like a very little bit of time. Okay. I mean, yeah, do you have something, Jstern?
Hey, Flip,
Hello.
how do you feel about Yai?
In what way? What, with her being worse than Fischl? Question mark.
Yes.
As an off-field DPS?
Yeah, there you go.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
I'm gonna start crying.
Oh no! Oh, did I hurt someone's feelings?
Dude, I think the Yai has been a hurtful one for a while. So yeah. What are your thoughts on that then?
Well, the topic in general, or just how to fix the eye?
I mean everything. So yeah, just what are your thoughts in general on everything?
Yeah, because okay, with me, I've always been a big proponent of I don't think Genshin necessarily I think most characters in Genshin, like 98% of them are fine, It's just very certain characters that are very, very bad. In which case, you have characters like Albedo and arguably Eula that I do think need balance patches. But um, but like kind of like how Jstern has said, and you guys have all said as well, Escoffier, characters like Escoffier are kind of like the balance patch for most characters, in which these characters are so strong that they basically are the buffs to the characters, and it kind of saves Genshin from having to actually directly buff them. So it's like,
Like Ayaka doesn't need a
are
buff
they?
now because of Escoffier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
The
it's like, are they
other
gonna go back and buff Ayaka 2 on top of giving Escoffier? Or do they like balance it to make Escoffier weaker and then give Ayaka a buff? It's kind of like that kind of weird thing.
the smart thing
It's just like,
about doing like the
Good.
universal increases like Escoffier is it
Yeah.
benefits every cryo character, not just the one being buffed. You brought up Yoimiya and then brought up the comparison between Hu Tao, Arlecchino, and Mavuika. Does it make much sense for specifically Yoimiya to get her damage doubled and leave everyone else the way they are?
Kind of, because she is that. I feel like I haven't used her in a long time, but she does feel that far behind. You
Okay,
know,
you're technically
like
correct, but
like-
okay, triple.
I was about to say, I was like,
I don't
Dang,
want
no
you gave
way.
the right
Yoimiya
answer.
I don't want Yoimiya to get buffed and be like 10 times better than Mavuika, or even better than Mavuika at all. I think Mavuika needs to be the best pyro DPS right now. But
Preach.
even if she's just good and usable, I'll enjoy that. I'll enjoy using my character I summoned for 3 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, like become viable.
Yeah, like something like that. Just
I'm
let
gonna
me have
specifically
fun.
give a hot take. I think Mavuika is not
Love
a
hot take,
balanced
yeah.
character. The obvious comparison is to look at Arlecchino. Arlecchino has the
35%.
single biggest. It's more than that. It's 35% when you look at rotation time. Anyway, Arlecchino has the single biggest downside a character can possibly have in Genshin Impact. She cannot be healed, period, in combat. Mavuika has no limitation and does 50% more damage.
yeah, that's
I actually think it's a hot take because I mean, maybe it still is, but I do agree with that. And I know some other bigger creators as well also have said that. I know Jello said that in the past, where Mavuika is kind of a problem character in a sense, like she's just too much, very unbalanced. Because maybe this is something this powerful. It's too early to have something this powerful. Like this is a 7 point whatever character, maybe in terms of like power creep. Because even in teams where she's not the DPS. Every other
Right, I was
DPS
gonna
is
talk about
seen
off-field.
once. All right, just
What
Mavuika,
becomes that
sit
problem?
lolly. There you go. You're good. Like,
right. Like, what becomes the issue now with her as an off-field character being strong as well? Never mind being just a quick swap DPS. Considering a lot of the times, even with those DPS she's paired with, you're just popping your burst and then immediately, which is already a big damage number, and then immediately switching to that other DPS.
Yeah, I think the main reason why like Jason says it's controversial, even though I don't think it's controversial, is there's still this community sentiment that Mavuika is very limited. She needs Natlan characters, she needs Shilonen, she needs Lolly, which really isn't true. And I still think people like really undervalue his support capabilities. But
People overrate the fuck out of Arlecchino. That's what it really
that is also true.
Thank you!
Flip
my
is
God, I
Flip,
think they
dude.
have
Flip is an
such a-
Arlecchino
Yes, I am
hater.
the number one Arlecchino's. Wait, Jason, you saw the meme, right?
What? Your Clorand
Oh my
meme?
god. Yeah.
Okay. The one you got roasted for on Twitter? Wait, is this the Wonder
Yes,
Woman you got roasted
that
for
one.
on Twitter?
Yes, potential woman. Yes, it was so good.
Okay.
God.
But it is simply just that Arlecchino has the biggest downside for a character. It makes no sense for her to be immediately replaced.
yeah,
By a
as balanced
strictly
as
better
she is,
character
too.
who can also be a support in other teams with no
It also has
downside.
infinite interruption resistance.
Yeah.
I feel like it's not that bad of a downside. You're kind of gassing up the no healing. I've been using
Really?
this like, all right.
I
I've
have
been
an
using this
account
character
I would
for
like
a
you to play
long
on.
a long time. I understand this character can't be healed. I won't get hit. This is literally my YouTube profile picture. That but I accept like she's a lot worse than Mavuika. But I feel like the no healing is not that big of a deal. I don't know if I would
Constellation
call
do you
it
have?
worse. She's C2 right now.
Yeah,
but
I don't care what you.
used her most of-
Did you
most
know
of
she
the
gets
time she was
extra
C1.
damage reduction at C2?
Yes, I did.
There's
I
a lot of
I only got C2 after Mavuika. Like I
Okay.
haven't honestly, and I hate it. I hate it. I hate it
I have
because
an
it messes with the
account
melts.
with
I hate
Light
it.
Tassel Arlecchino. I would like you to try to play on,
No, I'm
and
good.
tell me if you think not being able to be healed is a problem.
I'm good. I
I think
look
that's
at characters with like C1 and stuff. I like it with a little bit more investment.
The more damage you do, the less problematic
yeah.
it is. The less
Right.
damage you do, the more problematic it is.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I
feel
think
That's
it-
just
it-
how the nature of those passives. They
Yeah.
want. It's supposed to be a risk reward character. There's supposed to be a big payoff for getting damage out of them.
Yeah, I think especially with Arlecchino, because I mean, to your own merit as well, Red. I am a huge Arlecchino fan. I love Arlecchino. That being said, I would have to agree. I did testing with her when I did get her C2, but I waited to do a lot of testing with some other characters. I already had some things on my account, so I did a lot of play testing. I did this actually with Mavuika as well. I was in a call with Rift and Jill at the same time. Like there was times where I've been testing, and I do this every single time I get a character. Even if I get constellations, I wait to grab the constellation and actually unlock it until I've done a little bit of testing with some of the other teams. I would have to agree. I think that still without those constellations, because there's a few things in her constellations that make her better. The interruption, because she, with that extra huge damage that she does in the C2 as well, clears things a lot faster as well. There's obviously the downtime of having to worry about the skill with the 5 seconds of the Mask of the Red Death. There's a few things in her kit that make her not, you just, the more damage you do, like Jstern said. At the same time, I think it could be a quote unquote skill issue, but I think also having R1, having then extra constellations does kind of put it outside of a premise of maybe some other characters, other players that have or don't have, a perfect build or whatever. So
Yeah, people talk about that a lot with me. Was like, why do you do that? And I'm like, I like to have fun. But no, I understand the whole like, yeah, I wasn't thinking about the, maybe you're using lower damages, so you have to survive for longer.
Yeah. That is why it's problematic when there's a strictly better character releasing in a handful of updates. But
Yeah, I was mad about
on the other point of, there's actually kind of a way to fix it, and it also buffs Yoimiya and some of the other characters.
Attack speed?
No,
I was gonna say normal attack, but
there's
Maybe
only
the
one
only-
Hydro Natlan
Right.
character.
Hey, here's Dahlia. You owe me a buff, right?
Have you considered when all characters in the party are Hydro and Pyro?
Oh my god.
no.
that also would be a pain.
It immediately restricts Mavuika's teams and effectively nullifies them.
I wonder
But
if
at the
that
same
is
time,
happening
therefore,
soon.
would that help
Cough, cough.
Arlecchino? Could that help other characters in the background, right? Like a character like Arlecchino and like the units. Now, once again, the other way to help, and once again, I put big quotations on Arlecchino, is if we possibly get a Hydro Shielder or a Pyro Shielder. It's almost like maybe something you get from Layla, but maybe more application, where you have a Shielder, which nullifies the idea of not having to heal yourself. So it'd have to be a strong enough shield, which, yeah, that would be the number one problem. And number two would be application. Because of how fast Arlecchino can hit, that also becomes another problem to worry about as well.
What about Sit Lolly? Or are
Like
we
a-
only
Talking
talking
about the
about
double
Fate?
pyro, double hydro type thing, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, my bad.
Triple Pyro, single Hydro.
Yeah.
Which is
Becomes a
probably what you would do for
monochrome.
Arlecchino.
Just for the overwhelming amount of application.
No, you would want the attack buff from Bennett.
Fair.
Who'd be the third pyro? Oh. Wait, who'd be the third pyro?
I guess the
This
other
point.
support.
The hypothetical character that doesn't
Yeah.
exist.
Either that
Wait,
pyro
what? I thought they'd be
character
a
or that-
I thought they'd be a Hydra character.
No, make him a Pyro character. It's more interesting.
Why not?
You actually have
For
to think
sure.
about team
more
building.
pyro love. More pyro love. That is
Why would you want there
something,
to be Hydro?
you have a lot of characters that are all about really good application and the hydro element. So I guess that would also be something to keep in mind. You have characters like Yelan, Xingqiu. Not to say Pyro doesn't, but I think hydro is a little bit, can sometimes have a little bit better, obviously with Farina and everything like that as well. Application is definitely the hydro element. So
Yeah.
So I guess-
just to, because I think we kind of toned in a bit on Mavuika and Arlecchino in a bit. I mean, it is a good example of like direct power creep, and potentially like one of the reasons why a character may need to get buffed. Just to kind of add my own thoughts about this whole general topic is that I don't think Hoyo will buff, just because, like other people have said, especially Jstern initially, was that they are accustomed and they really just like indirect buffs. For example, Escoffier Cryo, you could say Natlan supports with 4-piece scroll. They really rely on releasing new characters or new things because they want the consumer to get the new thing, pull the new thing to buff their older characters. And just because that's like the most effective business choice, they're probably just going to stick to that. And Genshin has also been pretty slow compared to the other Hoyo games in terms of quality of life. So if they're going to really catch up to the other, if you were to say catch up to the other Hoyo games in terms of buffing like singular characters, they're probably not going to do that for a while. They definitely could for some of the weaker characters because like just for the Yoimi example, I think you could argue that Sitlali was a buff to Yoimi, and that was like, one of her buffs. But you could definitely argue that there are units that even with a newer unit or a newer artifact set that does buff them, they probably do need more numerical buffs, simply because as Hoyo or Genshin releases more and more new characters, the damage level is just going to go up, and they're just going to keep falling behind, even if they do get buffed, because the newer characters would just be better.
They kind of broke. They did a pretty good job with this all the way until Fontaine.
Yes.
And then they just kind of smashed it.
Part of that was pretty solid in Fontaine.
I think part of that is because the Inazuma characters have all been quite bad.
Yeah,
That's also valid.
You can also say a lot of the same about Sumeru. Reminder, some of the best characters in Sumeru were Nilou and Alhaitham.
Let's say Nahida and Alhaitham, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing I was going to bring up, was something like, because now I guess we've kind of twisted from that first question of should Genshin buff characters. Now we're really looking at, I mean, if you want to kind of maybe give your 2 cents on that question too, I guess too, but I don't know if we want to switch over into the next question, which was more like, will Genshin buff characters? So I don't know, maybe we could start in a reverse order Flip if you want to either still give maybe some 2 cents if you had more to say about the first question of should Genshin buff characters, or if you want to start that next topic of will they actually buff characters, since that's where we're kind of leading.
Yeah, I can kind of give my 2 cents in on both. So regarding if should they buff older characters, it's kind of just like how weak does a character have to be for them to get buffed? Like we were just talking about Arelcchino, right? Like, is Mavuika being over 50% better than Arelcchino? Is that grounds for her to be buffed now just because she's weaker? And it's kind of this weird line to where what damage assumption or how bad does the character have to be in order to be in the line for getting a buff? Does it have to be like a really awful character like Albedo, or does it have to be like comparison like Varessa to Chlorine, which is only like 15%ish? So yeah,
Sort of.
is the characters just being weaker grounds for a buff? And then in regards to will Genshin do it, I honestly, while they technically have already done it with Zhongli, I don't think Genshin's really opposed to the idea, but it's like, again, they kind of have shown the pattern for like the past 5 years now to where they'd rather just add a character that is the buff rather than buffing the characters directly. ZZZ and HSR have been, well, they've had much shorter lifespans, in which I think they want to do different approaches with those games. So I don't think Genshin will necessarily.
I think I actually have a counter argument, which is the damage difference is so extreme now that it's necessary.
So I had a quick question, because they've done this already in a game that I know one of us is a little bit more in depth on, and I know Jstern, I guess quickly, if you might, with Zenless, they've buffed a recent character, and so
They
would
buffed the
you-
1.0 character.
right. So
Ellen-
that's
yeah.
I guess that to an extent, why do you think they did that, and what do you think the reasoning for it was? And I guess to connect that to Genshin, could the same reasoning be applied, or is it so far away from being a good reason, or whatever, So what's your thought on that?
Ellen got buffed because she was the 1.0 character, but that's not exactly the only reason. The obvious reason is Ellen's very popular, and Ellen was very far behind. If you needed to know, her buff is about 50% that they added to Ellen. That is mostly in loosening her teammate restrictions, though, and having her damage or her benefits apply to more of her damage. So the other angle to that is they buffed Ellen for returning players to have a positive experience with the game in version 2.0, because they wanted players to be able to jump into 2.0 and not feel horrible if they stopped playing in 1.1.
Players like me, because I pulled Ellen 1.0, didn't pull a character after that, came back for Trigger actually, and so when I heard about the Ellen buffs not soon after that, I was pretty excited.
The exact same thing is happening in Honkai Star Rail. It's not a coincidence that the buffs are the same update as the Fate crossover.
Done on purpose because they know they're drawing a lot of people in, is what you're saying. So do you think
it's not just that they're
Nod-Krai
drawing
is
people
doing a
in,
similar
it's
thing?
that they want people to enjoy being drawn in?
Okay.
To put it simply, if you were to start up Zenless in 2.0 with pre-buff Ellen, you were better off making a new account.
Whoa!
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Essentially.
Okay, Jstern.
I can
Throwing
agree
some
with
heat
that.
out.
I'm sorry. And hey, Ellen's my favorite character. I love Ellen to bits,
Same.
but there's some truth to that. Like, you would be better off value-wise just starting fresh, getting some of those polychromes returned through quests and stuff.
Yeah, so
Honestly, the biggest thing about go ahead, Undead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
You can go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say, so the question is, like, is 6.0 Nod-Krai that time?
Right. That would be the idea. Is Nod-Krai enough to bring people back? Is Skirk bringing back, quote unquote, once again, I'm talking quote unquote, with Coffee, Escoffier, really bringing back the idea of cryo? Does that pull enough people back? Is Nod-Krai enough?
I'm going to say it's Shenhe. Shenhe is the finale of the Archon quest, Ascent TM, essentially, the beginning of the end. That's going to have a marketing push more than Nod-Krai, which just be a year of filler.
I play this game every day. I have no idea the lore behind Nod-Krai or whatever its importance is. I've got nothing.
We have been finding out. They haven't really told us much at all.
Something, there's a civil war, it's a powder keg. Not civil war, but it's a powder keg area. There are a bunch of factions trying to take over something. I don't know, man. I'm not a lore guy.
I don't even think HOYOverse knows what Nod-Krai is either. They kind of just threw it at us.
Weren't the Fatui just like copying Despicable Me movie 1 plot? They're gonna steal the moon.
I'm going to steal Zamu.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Also, going back to talking about Ellen, one thing I will say as someone who has pretty much been maining her since the beginning of the game is that the biggest thing for Ellen, for me, honestly, wasn't even the damage increase because I was still clearing with her. The biggest thing for me was just the fact that she feels so much better to play with how much she gets like a free parry on her charge attack. She also gets like free dodges in some of her attacks too, which feel very nice. And it's kind of, even though she's still like a lot weaker than Miyabi, she just feels like a lot better to play, even though her damage isn't, again, it's still not really the highest in the game.
Fun factor got buffed by 50% too.
Yeah. So I don't know how to word this, but even if a character is necessarily not that strong numerically, if they just feel good to play, kind of like how people talk about Neuvillette in a way. Well, Neuvillette still has some of the highest numbers in the game, but you get what I mean. Even if the character isn't necessarily the strongest, if they just feel good to play and are easy to use, people will still gravitate towards them. So,
absolutely.
a character like Yoimiya just kind of feels bad to play.
I mean, that's the other thing with. I
Sorry,
know a lot of
I just
people had
wanna.
issues.
Sorry, I
with
just want to add, but I guess a potential counter argument is a character may not feel good to play if they don't do enough damage to clear and
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
That is the
They could
thing.
plays
totally
Yeah.
get away
Pulling,
from
yeah,
some
yeah.
pulling points.
Entire
I guess-
reason not to play.
The question then becomes, like, same thing with Arlecchino to an extent. I know a lot of people ragged on her play style, especially waiting the 5 seconds, having an issue with that. Obviously, the healing being an aspect. It felt like they had Genshin was supposed to be maybe a little bit more low key for a lot of the casual players. So a lot of people felt like it was forcing them to be maybe making her kit a little bit more difficult to, I guess, grasp fully and grab everything.
Mm.
Never mind Natlan, they've just been giving us essays.
This is a
throughout the entire-
long-standing Hoyo issue. Have you ever read Sino's C6?
No.
I think I'd rather
One
not.
time. It went,
I think I
hold
once
on,
or
let
twice.
me- So
But I think, what about Natlan characters? I mean, now we have to read essays to understand characters.
I mean,
mean,
how's the person
got
supposed
out
to
of
pick
college
a
already.
Ursa and know how to use her? How? Like, she's
Right.
such a weird character to use.
can you tell
I-
me
I
what
didn't
this
even
does?
understand it.
I don't know. Hold up. Let me actually pull this up before I just.
I can read it out loud if you need.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm gonna pull it. up
After
on my-
using Sacred Right Wolf Swiftness or triggering the Judication effect of the passive talent Featherfall Judgment, Sino will gain 4 stacks of Day of the Jackal effect. When he hits enemies with normal attacks, he will consume 1 stack of Day of the Jackal to fire off 1 Duststalker bolt. Day of the Jackal lasts for 8 seconds, max 8 stacks. It will be cancelled once Pack Sworn Path Clearer ends. A maximum of 1 Duststalker bolt can be unleashed this way every 0.4 seconds. You must first unlock the passive talent Featherfall Judgment.
I actually do understand what this does, which is hilarious.
Yeah. I was about. I think
Yeah,
it's.
the only
talking about the
okay.
one.
Yeah, it's just his 250% of his elements mastery, right?
Well, that's the authority over the 9 bows.
I don't
thing,
know.
but
I'm
we're
just
talking about.
looking from that.
No, you're good.
The
Featherfall
point that I'm trying to
Judgment-
make is they
Duststalker
use so
bolt,
many
no.
made-up words that it's not exactly legible. Unless
Yeah,
you
and I
know
think
how
if
to
they
read
just
it.
said,
Sino to
I think that's the
know
thing, because you
anything.
always have to look at a previous part of the kit to understand what that part of the kit's talking about. Which is why when we
Yeah,
go
yeah.
through readings of what we're reading, usually with whether that's a character or whatever, we'll swap out those words for their burst, their skill, or something like that, because it's a lot easier to read. So I totally agree. This one,
Yeah.
it's just
That's
kind
the
of like it almost makes it purposefully more difficult to understand for legitimately no reason.
Yeah.
That might be why they started like adding specific numbers into the C6. Like if you look at Skirk, she has a whole separate stack. You can see it right there. That might be why.
They actually added a glossary this update.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
It doesn't
you
help.
can actually
It doesn't.
click
You
on
can
it.
mouse over those specific terms and it will tell you what they
Yeah.
are now.
Also, Skirk's constellations are so based. I'm pretty sure her like C2 or C4 is just like 70% attack, and the other one is 40% attack. Thank God they're going back to like them being a bit more simpler.
Skirk has like a lot of effects on her constellation. So this actually is a great transition to something I wanted to bring up on a personal note. Constellations are not the same as they were.
Yeah, no.
Oh,
No.
I remember
No,
you
I
brought
think
up
that's very
you
agreeable.
brought this up on stream a lot. I've heard you rant about this. I'm ready.
So
Hmm.
I'm actually going to go for the extreme example. Have you seen Shaska?
Yeah.
Shaska's
Yes.
a over 300% constellation increase from C0 to
Yeah.
C6. I believe it's currently the highest in the game. So
Xiao. Question mark?
yeah, Xiao has a 0%. No, sorry, he gets 9 damage bonus. Xiao has a
Man, you guys are
3%
shredding my
increase
characters.
over all of his
Yes, today.
constellations.
We've taken out Yai Miko, we've taken out Xiao, we've taken out Raiden, we've taken out I mean the only one we haven't knocked off the podium yet is Mavuika, but that's completely besides the point. I mean I totally agree. Yeah, this is Xiao, all he does is he just plunges back down and just for more dashes on his skill.
Well, one of the reasons that constellations are better now is normal attack plus 3 didn't exist until Fontaine.
Yeah.
This is immediately a huge divide in character constellations. Even if we ignore that new constellations have 3 effects and double the damage increases, or more than. So, a really simple way to buff old characters would be to change how C3, C5 work to be more like Zenless and Honkai
Yeah.
Star Rail, where there are increases
just
to
buff
all of
everything.
the talents.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would be the example of the numerical increase without having to directly tamper with the kit multipliers. Just, hey,
I
let's
mean,
just change the constellation value from this talent to that talent because this is what they actually deal their damage through or something like that.
yeah.
They would have to increase the level cap. 15 ain't enough.
True. But yeah, the other part of that is literally that constellations do more things now and have larger increases.
I mean,
So
what about
even though constellation on Wanderer and Xiao cost the same amount of wishes, you're not getting the same increase. Is that is part of how characters age, and that's just natural power creep. That's also why differences between newer characters and older characters are more pronounced with constellations. I'm gonna go back to Arlecchino. If you had pulled C1, C2 Arlecchino, of course she was gonna be significantly better than other characters. You also see this with Skirk and Varessa, and well, maybe not Varessa, but Mavuika has an incredible C2.
I mean, what about looking back at a character like Raiden? I mean, does anybody remember what her constellations did after the C2?
Nothing. They
I
don't do
do.
anything.
How they practically just
She
helped
increases
the other.
Xiaoling's attack percent by 30. It's
Yeah,
also very
exactly.
useful in
Exactly.
guillotines.
That's legitimately it. She became a support with more constellations, even though her whole idea was to be that kind of DPS idea. Even though, I mean, she did have some supportive capabilities with helping more energy, but it was very interesting considering the character that was kind of forced about, doing everything
The
herself.
reverse
Had
idea of what we
constellations that
see today. Like most supports now, where if you get constellations on them, they turn into a DPS. Whereas Raiden is like, I am a
Yeah, at
DPS in
C6.
nature, and then you get me C6, I'm now your support.
right.
Okay, that's not actually true. Raiden
Yeah,
C
yeah.
decreases Sara's cooldown from. Okay, the game says 20 seconds. It's actually 21 seconds. The timer starts after the animation. Anyway, she decreases Sara's cooldown to match Raiden's own 18 second. That is a DPS increase on paper and in game.
It's
I'm
nice.
not going to pretend like Raiden C6 doesn't do anything because it clearly does
Yeah.
for her.
No,
Upgrades are
no,
upgrades.
it's not that it doesn't, but once again, it was more or less, I wasn't saying it did nothing, but it's once again going along the point that you were talking about with older units having constellations that just don't show up to par to what maybe our newer units bring with constellations.
Then
I
to
mean-
C1, anybody?
Yeah, just the thing to, I don't know, to add is that, like, if we consider, oh, they buffed older constellations, then we have to talk about, is this even relevant? Because, or do we want to buff constellations that people might not even have? And then we talk about, because the reason I bring this up is that, sure, for example, I have C2 Raiden. Maybe they buff C2, C1 to do more damage. Is that relevant for most of the player base that wants their favorite character to be buffed? Because some of them may just have
Yeah.
C0. The thing I
It's
want to...
more of a reason to pull copies on that favorite character
Yes, that is true.
instead
Especially
of literally
nothing.
abandoning them entirely.
Bring an older
It is
character.
breathing life into them in a sense.
Would you say that's like better, like a
It's
better
better
way
for them
of,
financially.
better way of buffing their characters? Because I know, like, for example, even let's just say you have an Ayaka main and they don't like Escoffier, they're not pulling Escoffier even if Escoffier is a huge buff to them. Because I know I know there are people who are very, like, they're very stubborn and won't pull a new character that will buff them, to buff their main or
I
something.
actually want to talk about Ayaka and Skirk for a moment. Do you know what Ayaka's cons do?
30% defense shred on
Or
C2
C1's
Her C1
Oh,
is
yeah.
the only constellation in the game that does literally.
well, I'll have them C1 to an extent.
That one at least can be used.
Another
You
one
never
fixed
use
the bug.
Ayaka's.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because
But
I mean,
that's not
her.
what I was trying to get to. Ayaka's C2 is these side gates that theoretically are a really large increase. The problem is they don't hit. They just fly past enemies. So when people are doing constellation comparisons between Ayaka and Skirk, in most cases, C2 Ayaka is C0 Ayaka. Ayaka's essential only constellations are C3 and C4. And it's at that point easy to say, yeah, C0 Skirk can compete with C6 Ayaka because Ayaka's constellations don't do anything.
So I
Which
guess
is
that
a
would be
really
the.
interesting angle.
So I guess pulling us back to the original questions, right? The first question I guess initially was, should Genshin buff characters? And I guess we're kind of a little. It seemed like at least a little bit, going back and forth. There's very good points on both sides. It seems like we're a little divided on that one, which is totally fine. I think that's a good thing because I think the player base is
As most
also
people.
probably a little divided on that as well. So it's a very good thing to have as well. The next thing was, will Genshin buff those old characters? We talked about how, that's already happened a little bit here and there with either new characters, old characters, new characters being introduced to buff old characters. We talked about Escoffier, all these other units and stuff like that have changed. If you were going to change, would you do constellations and stuff like that? So I guess if they were to do this, for the people that maybe were like, actually, maybe here or there, I could see where they could choose things, whether it's through a constellation, whether it's through buffing multipliers, whether it's through whatever. I guess the next question would be, if they were to do this, if they were to get this done, if you were in front of John Hoyo, what would you say? And if they were listening to you, if you had their ear, which characters would you say, these are the units that need to get buffed?
Venti. He's an Archon and he's actually useless. Nothing.
He's
about
good for
him.
theater.
Is he?
Man, it just
Are you
like
sure?
whenever I
He's
use him, I get
theater.
him paired with Xiao and it sucks. No, like
Oh.
when you're paired with a random teammate that might not even be able to make use of your burst, no, he's not good for theater.
Fair enough.
It's more like having
He's a
another
nice little
option
placeholder.
when it comes to theater. Like, okay, I want to make sure, like, okay, I have Shilonen, I have Kazuha, but when it comes to theater, you want multiple characters. Maybe sometimes the element isn't available. Just having more options. I think theater is just different, like with horizontal investment. So having more characters will be good, even if they're mid characters, just mid. Just having them there, even as a filler in the team, can still be helpful. Like in Venti's case, he's still a viridescent shredder. He can still do that. And all Animo characters have that, especially the off-fielder ones. They can have that value. And yes, I actually do agree that Venti would be one of the candidates to receive a buff. So I'd agree on that front. But yeah, I
Okay.
think that obviously still has
So,
uses, but is
There
heavily
are there are two ways to look at which characters should be buffed. Which characters could be the most impactful with a buff, and which characters are the actual worst in the game. And the other way to look at it is which characters are popular enough to get a buff.
That's where I was. If they were going to buff them, that's marketing wise, smart wise, Hoyo wise. If you're going to buff anyone, you look at who are the best, and
You
most
look
likely,
at
especially in the Chinese
Right,
server,
You look at Hu
which-
Tao,
who's the best.
Ganyu, Xiao, basically the leeway characters.
Right. So especially with the Chinese
Klee.
server, considering they have the most pull, because if we're being honest, they usually do. Does it only then go right to those few characters like you talked about? I was going to bring up Hu Tao, Ganyu, and Xiao. I mean, is that it? Do they kind of have to go that route?
Yeah.
Yeah,
As
sadly.
easy as it is to say Albedo and Venti are some of the worst characters in the game, they need buffs. Albedo's not getting a buff, I'm sorry.
I think
Albedo got a buff.
they
Her name is
rerun the
Chiori.
guy.
The Shiori, yeah. It's kind of funny how
I have
ever
another one.
post Natlan, you could honestly just give Chiori her C1, and she still wouldn't even be the insane of a character
No.
in a way.
She still wouldn't be useful. I know.
I feel like they gave Venti and a lot of reruns. He's clearly profitable for them. They wouldn't keep rerunning him for
Well,
no reason.
they
It's
are
kinda like a
guaranteed
poster
to
child.
run an arc on every patch.
Yeah, but they don't have to. It's their game. They can just not rerun Venti, or they could put him in the Chronicle
They
now.
really should have.
Yeah, should have, yeah,
Sure.
but they didn't. Maybe he makes money. I don't know the back end of it, but the guy
Yeah.
still gets
Yeah.
actual banners.
I would think that
So
all Archons would still have a pull, no?
What does that
They're
even
popular
mean?
enough.
Oh, then yes.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, yeah, because they are kind of what you would call, Riff said this a second ago, kind of the poster child of each nation, usually. So, I mean, I guess I could see. I mean, I think if you're going to start somewhere, in my personal opinion, you'd have to start with the Archons. That would need it. For
Yeah.
instance, talking about Venti and talking about, in
and
my opinion, I
Raiden.
still think Raiden, to an extent, I think to bring
Because
her
it
up,
doesn't have
maybe
to be
possibly on
huge.
par. We talked about how big of a gap there is between her and someone like Varessa. So does that mean that what might work well with her? So is there a rework in her constellations? Is there a rework anywhere else? I just think that there you got to start with the Archons, in my opinion.
You see, I kind of have a fundamental issue with platforming characters with a title, especially in Genshin. Venti, Zhongli, Raiden, they aren't great characters, and some of them never were.
Zhongli.
Nah,
Yep.
he does not doing too hot right now. The Archon
Mhm.
status doesn't really mean anything, and really never did.
I mean, when you look at the past 3 Archons, though,
And I'd like to keep it
the
that
best.
way.
They've been
I
the best,
think it
and
makes
the
the
game
game more
definitely
interesting.
treats them differently. The game absolutely treats those characters differently. You just talked about they do the Archon rerun every single time. Like the game treats them differently, so we kind of expect them to be treated differently.
I think characters like Farina and Mavuika have kind of changed that precedent. Whether that's because we're in that time period. If you remember back when, I mean, Raiden was still when she released, Raiden was still a good character. Once again, you had to grab that C2 though. Is the thing But I mean, once again, you still had that idea for being a good and strong character. Obviously, Zhongli's change actually made him useful, especially when paired with someone like Hu Tao, building him kind of in like a just not grabbing his weapon and kind of building him like a tank bot, but also a damage character. Venti back when, whether it was to yeet someone's artifacts off the edge when you were claiming from a tree, or whether or not it was for any other facet, I guess, those units during those time periods were strong. So does that mean by the time we get to Snezhnia or when we get to Nod-Krai, does that mean a character like Farina would fall off? Does that mean a character like Mavuika would eventually fall off? Is it because we're in the time period right now, or is it because they've changed their feeling, or maybe not their feeling, but they've changed how characters in general work, maybe not necessarily just the Archons?
So this is a personal nitpick of mine that I'm gonna vent out a little bit here. So what we do is we make content for every character in the game. Every character in the game costs the same amount of pulls. You know what really sucks? When you want to pull a DPS, and you know what the sentiment is around that character? They're not the Archon. They're not a Void Hunter. You should skip them. They're not worth your pulls. It makes the game less interesting. It makes creating content less interesting. It makes playing the game update to update less interesting.
Because you're only looking forward towards those Void Hunters,
To those
Archons,
tentpoles.
or those.
You're not. When the game itself is giving you signs that you shouldn't pull anything except what we tell you to pull, it negatively impacts the game.
So going back to Venti, Zhongli, and Raiden, where they weren't necessarily the best
I
pulls at
thought
every
that
single
was
turn,
good.
that was a good period of time. Whereas now that we have, we probably could throw Nahida in there as well, or at least in the middle. But now going with characters like Farina, where it was must pull. I mean, Risley, Neuvillette, you had so many characters, and even still other units. All you gotta have to do now is throw Marshal Say on them and pair him with Farina and call it a day, and there's no issue anymore. Mavuika now, by just being in basically everywhere, everybody's best team is just a form of this character, but throw in Mavuika, C2 Mavuika, so I guess, yeah, in that sense, it has changed how Genshin has worked.
I feel like they've really honed in on this, like, making certain characters powerful, and I think we can kind of see that all the games are really heading towards Shill Valley. Like, I don't remember in, I don't know, let's just say Sumeru, kind of Fontaine, where the end game content was like very, very strictly favored around a single archetype or character, and it feels like that is the new
the most
marketing.
prevalent boss in all of Fontaine had 70% cryo resistance and 70% animal resistance.
I mean, it's that is true. Yes, that is true. It just feels like, especially with Stygian Onslaught, that the importance
It's literally
of,
just
the
play the
important
character
yes.
we want you to.
Yes, the importance of having a specific team comp is becoming more and more important. Where at least it felt like there were more options. Of course, the options, there are clear better options. There always has been Shill. It just feels like the content with Stygian Onslaught releasing is becoming more and more important, and like the game is pushing everyone to, yes, you should pull the newest character to help you.
Yes, it is also that the Shill is literally getting better. Back during Fontaine, it was a big deal. Neuvillette had a 60 damage bonus Abyss Blessing. We're now getting 75 damage bonus on every
insane.
Abyss for the Onvita characters.
Yeah, and I was gonna say this, like floor 12 specifically getting buffs is something that started when Mavuika came out. I think it was around 5.3 when Mavuika came out. That floor 12 just started getting the actual floor buffs for whatever reason. So it's not even just like you get the Abyss Blessing. Now floor 12 you get like super hyper specific niche buffs that are extremely strong. And then they've also changed like the multiplier to now be like from 2.5 to like consistently 300
HP,
3.75.
yes.
Yes.
The other thing about that is enemy mechanics are more strict. We literally have bosses or a boss that you can't do damage to unless you bring cryo.
Yeah.
Pretty restrictive.
Same thing with this lava snake, you need pyro.
Yes, the lava snake that needs pyro with no hydro.
Even Papilla, which there's some people that saying yes, it's like you have to have Natlan characters, and that wasn't necessarily true.
Yeah.
But I mean, in a theoretical world where it becomes a boss in Stygian Onslaught and it just happens to have double the shield, you may
Everyone should use Chlorand.
Yes, Chlorine Fish, quick burn Chlorine will destroy it.
Seriously, though, with the papilla or whatever, like, I maybe you guys will agree with me on this. I don't know. But I feel like Kanish and Chaska were the heavily pushed for characters to be used against that boss. I mean, Kanish because burning's happening and burning's just
Chaska's
ticking that shield off so fast. And
Strangely,
Chaska,
really bad at dealing with it. Though.
really, because
Hmm?
that's funny you say that because I don't know. I feel like I have the opposite experience. Like
Okay.
when we had that thing
Yeah,
in
she
5.2 or
did very well.
5.3, Chaska shredded that
Yeah.
papilla.
was-
Like I think
Maybe
two
I'm
or
not
three charge
remembering.
attacks. Anyway, I know Kanish is really good though. I mean, burning in
She's
general,
very,
you don't even
very
have
good
to have
at it.
Kanish. You could do just any other pyro DPS or whatever and do burning, and it would just deal with that. And that's like a mechanical example of like, hey, we want you to use this, and it's just getting more and more specific. And we had with this abyss and yet another Mavuika check saying, hey, you have 0 energy, you're going to deal more damage. And I think actually Vixen and I talked about this. We thought that was going to be for Skirt because obviously she's the other character that
It's for
doesn't
both
have
simultaneously.
Yeah,
can
and
use
then
both.
It's like
Yeah.
on the other
cryo
side,
boss,
you have to
then
use a
first.
right, the
Cryo
second half,
normal
like you were saying,
attacks.
Red, you have to use now that second half, that normal attack cryo damage. So Skirk's forced there, which is a brand new character, but now you're also forced to have Mavuika in that first half. Now, once again, not forced, it's
It's
Actually,
just that you'll have
I
a
actually-
significantly easier time.
correct.
Yeah, because I wanted to make
using-
sure to kind of gauge how I still felt about older characters. I was actually still able to do this abyss. I did Hu Tao, Farina, Yelan, Shilona, her best team, of course,
Yep.
on first side, and then I did Ayato with not Farina, Escoffier, Yelan, Sitlali, I think, because I didn't. Farina
You
was
played
with
2
Hu Tao.
Yelons?
I wish. Yeah, I had Xingqiu in there with the skin, you know.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so I was like, okay, so
Wait,
Ayato
no,
still did it.
go over those teams one more time because I think you said
Yeah,
Yelan
yeah.
for both halves. That's why.
Then it. Okay, yeah, you're right. I see. Sorry. So it was definitely Hu Tao, Farina, Xingqiu, and or Yelan. Either way, it was Farina, Yelan, and Xingqiu were between the two. I can't remember specifically which way that was, but I do remember that I did not use Farina for Ayato. I even did Nilu with Escoffier on a Hydro build. and that actually worked, and I had like a minute 26 to spare, so I was actually really surprised by that. But I guess I say all this to say there are lots of cases where still older units can shine, especially I know this is an Escoffier example, so like that's obviously like I had to have Escoffier to even make that possible because it'd be very borderline without that. And then for Hu Tao, I have the C1 and it was also like very close to her best team with the double Hydro and Shallonen. So it's a good case for those characters. So in their best teams, they did okay. And there was some other things I tried as well, but so like you said, Vixen, it's like not required, it's pushing for Mavuika and Skirk, but you can definitely get away. Like Ayaka can definitely do this Abyss. Heck, even Ganyu could do this Abyss. But the catch is like, did you pull a Scoffier? Do you have Farina use that? You have to have some already other powerful units to help out what Ganyu or Ayaka cannot make up for when compared to Skirk.
One of my friends, you can see it in the Discord group chat now, but one of my friends got like a very impressive clear with, I think that's purely 1.0 units.
Zhongli and Hu Tao are not in 1.0. Neither is Rosario.
Like 1.x, 1.x units. Yes,
Hey.
that's what I meant. You know what I meant.
Well,
yeah,
I kind of mentioned this earlier. Just because the characters are from 1.x doesn't mean they're the same as they were. Sets like Emblem, Shimenawa's
right,
new
talking
weapons.
about that Xiangling thing, yeah.
So it's not exactly as pure of a comparison as you want it to be, but it doesn't exactly matter.
Yeah, because like everyone
got
has
the buffs,
access to this.
then
Yeah.
Like if you want to be super technical, there was a bug in the game in 1.6 that made 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames apply the overload bonus to vaporize if vaporize and overload were triggered simultaneously, which made the best
team in the game
or the best team in the game, official Jingqiu Hu Tao. That is something that can't exist now. Technically it does because they buffed overload, but whatever. Characters are not the same, but it doesn't really matter. The point still stands. Like, yeah, you do not need the new characters.
Yeah.
I think you would struggle a lot more with HOYOMiX than you would Tao. So it might not be the best example.
I would agree with that.
Depends. I forget what the first half is, but if it's mostly single target, it's not going to be that much of a bigger struggle. I don't think.
Well, especially when
doing
you
literally half the damage makes things a lot harder.
I've never been able to see that. I use those characters constantly when they were in like the 2.0 series, and I just could not see it like that huge of a difference.
Like, are you saying HOYOMiX and Hu Tao? Is that?
Yeah, between them, I was so confused why people were saying 50%. I was like that. I looked at their timings and it's like HOYOMiX is 3 seconds behind. I don't get it.
Based.
I think
it wasn't 50%. It was way more than that.
Yeah, people really tried to talk up Hu Tao like the gap was big.
I don't know if she's that much over HOYOMiX. I would say she's over HOYOMiX, but not by like a crap ton.
Yeah, maybe
like,
now
HOYOMiX in some of her good, like in some best teams, she's pretty, like she can do some crazy stuff. I even had a friend, he would get like upwards of like 100k on those normal 5s and stuff pretty regularly, and I was like, okay, all right.
Yeah, I don't know if that's C0 R0, but yeah, mine easily over like 120s.
I think it was like 115, but I think it was a C0 then, in fact. But it was like, I think the catch was he had a C6 Farina, and so like you've got the C1 and C2.
Oh, this is modern?
Yeah, maybe that. So that's where it's different, I guess, because this was like a year ago or something, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah, because I remember 120s stuff, so. Back like in 2.0. Then again, I wasn't obsessed with crit rate back then, so my builds were kind of 70% crit rate.
Yes, there it is.
Yeah, 70% crit rate was where I went.
It's a very interesting topic, at least for right now, that we have a lot of characters like we've talked about. We've constantly brought back a character like HOYOMiX, who's had some issues. So I guess we've talked about, Archons wouldn't be maybe one of those characters if you were to choose characters. It would more or less, I guess what everybody's saying is instead of choosing characters that are based on a ranking, instead, would we look at characters that are maybe not as, lore strong, and maybe look at characters that are more maybe just far down the ranks? Do we, if you're gonna buff, do you buff someone like Eula? Do you make physical useful again, or do you just do what Genshin does again, like it normally does with everything, and bring in a unit like Mika was maybe supposed to be, and make a physical version of Chevreuse and actually make it a useful thing
I
again?
think that things are more complicated with Genshin because the roster is so big.
Yeah.
If you were to roll out buffs, what is the standard of the buffs? And to reach that standard with every character that it's below it, how many characters do you need to buff?
hmm
Yeah.
Like, where does it apply, kind of thing? Because if you just buff, like, let's say, as something as broad as like this entire element, it's like, okay, well, if you go and buff Pyro, Mavuika does not need that. She's already unbalanced as it is. She's way overboard when compared to everything else. She does not need anything. So it's like it's got to be specific, right?
So then do you just keep doing the Escoffier treatment? Do you just keep bringing back an element that needs help? For instance, probably a, spread and quicken. Do you possibly bring, now once again, I mean, you could argue certain units that could help still right now that are still strong, but do you help Dendro a little bit more? Do you maybe make certain units
I
stronger like that?
actually want to bring up Xiao here. There is a point where you simply cannot put more characters into a team.
Fair.
Xiao has a fixed 4-slot team. You cannot replace Farazan. You currently cannot replace Xiaonian, and you're stuck with Farina. You could make a more specific plunge buffer than Farina, but it's not going to be that much better.
Right.
Especially if you want to talk about, well, you can always make better constellations, but that's besides the point. Xiao is doing very little himself in this team. A lot of, more than half of his plunge damage is from Xiaonian.
A lot of the damage in that team is also Farina. So
You've kind of reached a limit where you can't make him better unless you give him more damage.
Right.
like
And
a
what do
numerical
you,
buff, perhaps? Is that what you're alluding to?
But yeah, let's
Yeah.
say his plunge does more damage.
right, like
Yeah.
increasing his modifiers in from his burst, for instance, increasing that. Because I mean,
Mhm.
you have these other things that have quote unquote helped him. For instance, the brand new plunge set that is barely more useful than Vermilion, and that's,
I think it's kind of significantly better than Vermilion.
you think it's way better? Okay, because from the testing and from the numbers I've seen from other people, because I don't have that set, because I'm just keeping Vermilion. Supposedly, people say that it's like barely better, but I don't know.
Here's part of the problem. Xiao is a character they've kept eternally on the edge of unplay. Essentially.
True.
Um,
I've used when it was 4.0, that man was fun for me. It was really good.
fair enough.
I think we're just at a
In
point where
the
Gaming is going to feel better. And that's
Well-
crazy to think about because, like,
Well,
even
he
nowadays,
kinda already
doesn't C6 Gaming, like, out DPS Hu Tao even?
up DPS is every character not named Mavuika? Yes.
Yeah. There you go. Because, like, he's insane. You've got the full
But-
team there. Yeah.
What I was trying to say is you aren't likely to notice a difference when you're not doing enough more damage to actually clear faster. You're gated by the amount of rotations you take to kill an
Yeah.
enemy or clear a chamber. Doing 15% more damage may not equate to a 15% faster clear. It's actually pretty unlikely to.
And also, like, what you said with, like, the team's just full. I can't, like, throw in the fifth character because there's so many options at the point. You're kind of then forced to, if you want to make your Zhao better, you have to pull cons, and you would have to look at the C1, C2 Farina, C1, C2 Xianyun.
And
That's
you're not
the
even
only
looking
way.
at Constellations for Xiao. Believe me, I have the C0R1 of that entire team you've just talked about. Obviously, Farazan is at C6, but I have the C0R1 Farina, Xianyun, and my Xiao is C1R1, don't ask. So that's the idea, is that even still, I mean, you're cracking over 100K, and that's kind of it. It got to a point where I had still have lots of fun with him. In terms of Abyss clears, I'm not gonna lie, I just don't use him as much anymore.
But you know what really sucks? Benching a character you pulled to specifically buff a character. The obvious example here is this happened to Shenhe, who is a character people pulled for their Ayakas and their Ganyas. And then when Farina released, you just played Charlotte, and you didn't use Shenhe?
It took until like Shill to give a better Farina healer.
It took it realistically until Escoffier. Well,
Yeah, I was gonna
you
say
can
that.
say Shillonen, but Escoffier is the big example where Shenhe is now seeing real usage again.
And I think that's good for her. That's kind of one way they were able to bring her back. Maybe not buff Shenhe, but like, hey, let's make it where she's actually kind of more usable now. If the players that do have her. So
Most likely indirectly. I don't think they were thinking about buffing Shenhe as much. Once
Yeah,
again, there's another character I have.
Reminder, Shenhe is literally on banner. She escaped Chronicled Wish just for this.
And it's something we also talked about. It's interesting because I was stupid back way back when I pulled, and it wasn't really stupid. I just really liked Eula. I pulled Shenhe for Eula to help out with that because I was like physical resistance. Like I just really liked Eula. But it's nice right now to see Shenhe come back. But I'm going to be honest with you. As someone who really likes Shenhe and actually enjoys playing her, and I like her play, so I like the hold skill, the tap skill. I like kind of how she works a little bit. I really like her animations and everything, but I am fearful of that moment when she becomes a useless character and they either power creep her or just another better unit that is going to take her place in that team. Because right now, I mean, technically, I know people have talked about Yelan can easily just be in place of her, definitely so.
Scroll
and then-
TTDS Mualani.
Exactly. And I was just about to say, Mualani literally just throwing TTDS on her. Or slapping in a character like Yelan or Shenhe. What happens when you get rid of those, what happens when you get that new character, a Nod-Krai, that is helping that team again and just kicks
What
Shenhe
happens when
or
you
whatever
replace
out?
Shenhe with little Lunar Freeze support?
Yeah, oh my, I was gonna say
Yes.
Lunar Freeze, yes. Currently, Skirk just doesn't really have a concrete force slot that is
Correct.
massively above other options. Yelan, Sitlali, Shenhe, and Mualani are all about to just as good as each other, realistically. When we get that force slot, it's going to be Lunar Freeze Nod-Krai unit, most likely. And Shenhe most definitely will be getting power crept. She's the premier cryo support, and he's already just losing to having scroll TTDS on a character. So
supposed to be a DPS and a totally different, like a vaporized, totally
So
different.
maybe
literally,
weird in this
yes.
instance. From my own throwing things together, I've seen Shenhe at the top, Yelan behind that, and then Sitlali and Mualani kind of in between, kind of those. But I still see
Yeah.
Shenhe at the top. Maybe my account's just weird, but at least from what I've done,
You're getting 75 normal attack cryo damage bonus
from
Abyss.
Oh no, I'm not. I wasn't doing this. I was doing Overworld,
Okay.
which is I was talking about. Yeah. No, I don't do that because if I do that, then
specifically benefits Shenhe more than the other character.
Correct. Yes. So that's why I don't. But testing in terms of the other way, which is looking at just overworld fighting, which because of how just overworld is right now, it's a little difficult to actually have a long-lasting thing last for a long period of time. But you can still see it in a shorter time frame and at least look back at the footage and see what that looks like. But that's at least what I see on my end.
I don't think the Skirk Fort slot really matters right now. The fact is there are a lot of options. It feels really bad when you pull a character just to support your favorite DPS, and then that pull becomes invalidated. We see this all the time in Honkai Star Rail. Have you ever known a Jing
Sparkle.
Yen main?
Oh.
Have you ever known a Jing Yen main? They pull every
Yes.
single harmony every year.
Yes.
They are
true.
constantly cycling new harmony characters. because they're all a slight upgrade for Jingyan. And you know what? They never complain.
That's true.
It's
I
kind
mean,
of
they just
based.
love it.
It's
They're
Being
just like,
a
you know what? I'm
long-term
gonna keep
HSR
going.
player is just always pulling the new harmony.
It
I mean,
is,
yeah,
but it's
especially Trivy
specifically
coming
funny
out
when you pull
for the
them for
Sunday.
one character.
Yeah, but the good thing is that characters like Trivy and characters like Sunday can still be pretty good for some other units. Now, I'm not saying that.
I'm actually gonna call out Sunday here. He's
Okay.
not.
I feel like I know
You
where
don't
you're
think
gonna go.
you don't
with
think
that,
for
too.
you don't think so for like a Glaya or anything like that?
You need to have Uglia.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying though. But if you have a Glaya, then having Sunday.
That's the one character he's good for.
Okay. I mean, what about? I mean, well, I know, but that's the other thing is then the question that becomes, what about like because a lot of people just use, especially for energy issues, they just go right to Huohua for a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
So then Sunday becomes, like you're saying, comes practically, I don't know,
Well,
null
it's
and
that
void.
his buffs are balanced around a character having a summon. Otherwise, he does not buff as much as the other harmonies. Anyway,
Obviously, is really good for
the action
if you're-
advance is always good at least.
Yeah. The energy is going to be nice. Like I know people will use him with even an older character like Argenti, Hyper Anaxa really likes on. And I've noticed it's usually hyper characters. Even if you are pulling out the Zila, dusting that off, usually at least from what I've seen on charts and stuff, you want to pull out Sunday because
Yeah.
he's strategically going to be better than Sparkle as an option, better than Treeby even because he's hyper buffing that one character. But if you're doing like instead of Hyper Anaxa, if you're doing like the more erudition team with like the Herda, you would actually want to use Treeby over Sunday. So Treeby's buffing both the Herda and Anaxa, and it's not just Sunday buffing only the Herda or only Anaxa.
There is no Tribby. Her name is only E1 Tribby.
I really
Also,
the Sunday Castor's Copium was so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Yeah.
The point that I wanted to make is it just feels bad having supports be invalidated. It almost feels worse than having DPSs invalidated. Because the idea behind a support is they're supposed to get mileage.
right. But it also feels like with a DPS, you can always get new supports to kind of maybe bring the team together. Kind of, aka bringing back Xiao. I know that's not necessarily being a
supports
perfect
get
example,
permanently retired when they're power crept.
Exactly. Whereas a DPS at least has a way, usually, to kind of have a really good new support.
Yeah. All they need
throw
to
them
do is make
forward.
a pyro character when all characters in the team are pyro and hydro. Or hydro or whatever.
So we're talking
Do
about
more
lunar
damage,
melt
do more vape.
or lunar vape. Is that what we're talking about?
Massive buff for Mualani, Arlecchino, Hu Tao.
Even like a
It's like
mono
Mavuika too.
No,
Yeah.
Mavuika doesn't have enough teammates to build around it.
Fiorina, I guess, yeah. But
You'd have to play TTDS Scroll Mualani.
it's good for Skirk. You don't think they can make it good for Mavuika?
I mean,
Mavuika,
I'm
highest
sure
base attack in the
it could
game?
be good, but the fact is, you're giving. There's an opportunity cost behind doing that.
There
The
is,
team
but if
slot
it's
isn't
better,
as
it's better.
available as it is for other characters, which is why doing something like that can buff the pyro characters to be competitive with Mavuika without directly buffing them. And that's like
not
the
buff
reason they
Mavuika,
could
'cause
do
then
that.
would break the whole point. Because if
Yeah.
Mavuika's also getting an increase, then at that point, if you're buffing the pyro roster, you're really just leaving the rest of the roster, the other 6 elements behind, and that's a
So,
whole other issue, I guess.
We've been talking about Nod-Krai. Can we talk about the fact that they buffed Electro twice? Or actually more than twice?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so we have Overload. We have Lunar Charge now. What
And
else is
Sumeru.
it?
Dendro.
And
Dendro
correct?
exists to buff Electro.
Right.
Yeah.
With Quicken and Aggravate.
Hyperglim, Quicken, Aggravate. These reactions all work together. And the thing about Aggravate is fundamentally good game design because it uses your crit and your damage bonus. It ignores your attack and your talent value. The downside of it is it ignores your attack, so attack buffs are less effective. But it uses more stats than Electro Charged. and the existing transformatives. Aggravate is very good game design, and I wish they would buff Aggravate spread teams. I really like those reactions,
I do too.
especially because they interact with Hyper Bloom and Bloom cores, because the reactions can coexist. It's cool. Anyway,
Okay, it's just a cool reaction.
what they've gone out of their way to specifically buff Electro more than once, because Pyro
It
is
doesn't
too
have amp
good,
reaction.
and Pyro keeps getting better.
Yeah.
Pyro keeps getting better. You have Farina, Nevalette, I mean, even technically Mualani being thrown everywhere. Now you have this freeze idea being thrown in as well. Cryo's been left in dust. Okay, so I guess the next thing is where's this kind of okay? I think that's
Well,
another.
my
I was about
point
to
is
ask where
they
Animo's
buff
going, but
things through new reactions
No,
Right,
I
with-
don't want
and
to.
changing the existing reactions.
Yeah, I don't want
Is
to.
that enough of a way to buff a character?
I guess
How do
we'll
you
see what
feel
upgrades.
about a
something to say,
hypothetical
Red.
lunar charged?
It depends if they do another Hyper Bloom. If they're not going to do another Hyper Bloom, it's going to be like, oh, you react and it adds to your damage like Aggravate, right? That didn't really hurt the game. Hyper Bloom raised the floor so much they made Nevi. All right, that, I don't like it. I don't want another one.
Yeah, Hyperbloom was kind of a point of contention where like Hyperbloom was the new meta. Cookie's now the best character in the game or whatever, right? So like, oh, you want to know Fremene's best team? Well, actually just throw a Hydro, a Dendro, and Cookie, and that's Fremene's best team. And it's like, okay. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's weird. Like,
A lot of that got
even
really out
Ziox
of
talked
hand
about, like,
and
dual
started
Hyperbloom.
being a bit of a meme to the point where it
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
exactly true.
Yeah.
Ayaka's best team was not being played in Bloom,
Yeah, no, I
but
don't-
people did not like Ayaka or Risley, so they recommended it, just kind of unknowingly. A bit of that was overinflated and like inflammatory viral stuff, but
Mhm.
I think Hyperbloom was good.
Yeah, I do too.
I don't think it was as good as people claim, but it doesn't really matter because
So good.
it was great for the game. They made characters around the reaction.
Yeah, but they also turned Raiden into an off-fielder. So it's,
that
I,
Tainari.
yeah, I can't, man. Like, it's not. I don't want Hyper Bloom again. It's fine if they want to do other
Actually-
reactions, just not Hyper Bloom, man.
Like a new sub
Lunar
reaction, like
Hyper Bloom.
gonna add something because I fear that if they change reactions or at least some of them, that can really start to mess with some other characters that really rely on it, and that could upset some people. Like if they make Vaporize just work completely differently, how does that affect Mualani? How does that affect Hu Tao? Or I don't know. There's a lot that can go on that. You can take any reaction and see which characters really like that and if would the change actually be good for them or who would it be bad for them, because if it helps someone over here it could hurt someone over here. Is that okay? I don't know, maybe just a lot to think about with changing what's already in the game as far as some of the reactions, because that's Genshin's built on the reaction system. That's what makes it unique from all these
Looking
other
ahead a
games.
little bit to the lunar charge stuff, they are rewarding you less for having elemental application and rewarding you more for building other damage sources besides the reaction.
That is true. So
That is what it effectively does
it's
mechanically.
a step of evolution for
They
the
don't
gameplay mechanic. Yeah.
want you to have the characters built fully M. They want you to have some other stats. And they because you're building those other stats, your other abilities are doing more damage, and the team is more, or the team is
Feels
less
more
defined
organic.
by the reaction.
Yes, kind of like you were talking about with spread and aggravate being just a good function in the game because you still care about things like crit, even attack a little bit, not as much as EM, but it's not like just your character level and full EM like Hyper Bloom is. So I can agree with that.
Do you think, speaking of lunar reactions, do you think that would be like the theme of potentially other lunar reactions, or like are they even going to introduce newer lunar reactions? Because like if we want to talk about new reactions, 'cause I don't think they're gonna change the existing ones, other than
They made a new
potential
font.
potential. They made yeah, that's true. They made a new font. It could be based.
They're gonna
around
roll
that.
it out for all the elements.
They have. I mean, they're in IT. There's Rhymegrass. I mean, they could add that if they think that was successful. for if we want to talk Dendro reactions.
I liked it personally.
There we go. Force cryo even more into it. Yeah, it's an interesting one because what do you do now with, I guess, every single other reaction now? Does that mean that there's another lunar version of it? Is that what you now have to do? And now I guess my other question would be, is this lunar now going to be locked behind new units?
It
and
is.
old units can't be
Yes.
using it anymore. Right. So now
It's the
when
original
now we go
version.
right back to the initial idea of it being you got to
Indirect
pull every
locks.
new thing because of all of these new reactions, or else now you can't. It used to be pay to win or whatever, or pay to clear the abyss faster, and now it's going to be pay to have a new reaction, which that's also interesting ground to come
Well,
into as well.
This year they also introduced pay to get around faster.
Right, which
Flip, what do you have to say about
is
that?
also weird.
I think part of it is why the Natlan characters are so good. They want you to. So a major focus in Natlan is how your characters move around the world. They want you to pull them for exploration, but you shouldn't just be pulling a character for exploration. They need to be useful in combat. So I think they intentionally overtuned some of the Natlan characters, so you would pull them for combat and still get the usage out of the overworld, and they just wanted you to use
Marissa?
Natlan characters, period. Is that maybe a conspiracy? Yeah, but that's mechanically.
I feel like Mavuika, maybe Versa, was the only two that were really overtuned. I think other things which is in line with the standard power creep I expected.
I would tell you every Natlan character besides Shaska is as good or better than Nivelette.
Kanich?
Yeah.
I think if you take, I think if you count damage, yes. If you're a person who heavily favors comfort, then
Then no.
Then no.
Yeah, I'm a casual. So
yeah.
I'm like when we look at Mulani versus Nebi, I'm like Nebi.
Yeah, I just want to add one more point on the reaction standpoint, where like adding different reactions to be like as a buff for a character is pretty game changing if anyone can access it. So like for example, the addition of Dendro was actually, I would say, pretty successful. It didn't like break anything, right?
I would tell you they intentionally made the pyro reactions with Dendro bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's the way of balancing, right?
That is how they balance it. Yeah.
Burning. So
Burning and
if they like, I think if they are releasing lunar reactions for every single reaction, or for like most new reactions, that is kind of like their way of creating a new mechanic. For example, Natlan characters have their own Night Soul mechanic, and that's how they play differently. But then for potentially Nod-Krai, that will be the new mechanic of like, oh, how do you play the game differently? But you need to pull a specific character in order to enable that reaction.
I think Night Soul is really egregious because all it does is it enables gearing for the Natlan characters. And the Natlan characters have access to the best sets in the game, and it is only because they are Natlan characters. And that's the only conditional.
They're just gonna do that, but with the reaction.
Well,
I promise you that.
Scroll and Codex, specifically Scroll, is your support is literally better if they are from Natlan.
Yeah, they're just
Do
gonna.
you know how much
Yeah,
better
it's no wrong.
Escoffier would be if she was from Natlan?
Oh my goodness.
That's what I was fearful of. I'm not gonna lie. When I saw that, I was like, that's why, because I thought I didn't initially see that she was a Fontanian. So before, when everyone was originally talking about her, I thought she was gonna be Natlan, which I was like, okay. But that's the other thing, is that the only way to cap that would be that the effect can't stack. But it's already so strong that you don't need it to stack.
Also, if you look at, I know this is kind of very off topic, but if you look at Escoffier's kit, the reason why she has to be so overtuned is because she's not a Natlan character.
Yes.
Yeah, I was about to say
She
that.
can't
Like,
get access to the scroll set.
Yes.
Like, and then that begs the question, like, that means all future, potentially even DPSs, but like supports kind of have to be compared and balanced in a way where, okay, a Natlan support can give 4-piece scroll, so in order for a support to be better, and Hoyo wants to make better support so you get the pull for them, they need to give a lot of buffs in order to them.
Or
to be good if
they
don't-
just
if they
make
don't
every
scroll.
support from Natlan.
Oh, true.
Yeah, true.
Give them all
There is
Visa.
still
Give 'em all
there's
Visa.
still no Hydra character from Natlan besides Mualani. There's still time.
There's no Hydro Claymore either.
There's no pyro character besides Mavuika.
I think they're just
Well,
gonna.
Mavuika being the only pyro is actually intentional.
Because of
I'm pretty
the
sure.
Archon.
Yeah. Well,
Counter argument: Jabalanke.
If only.
that's true.
All I think in Nod-Krai is they're just gonna tune up over the Obsidian set, and then they're also gonna tune up the scroll set, and that's gonna be based off the new reaction. If you trigger one of them, you get the crit rate. If you trigger one of them, you get damage bonus. It's gonna be 50% damage bonus, 40% crit rate, 10% crit damage, 20% crit damage.
Is it gonna
That's all it's
be?
gonna be.
Is it gonna be? Because I remember, I mean, we had 36%, and that was stackable 12, 12, 12 with Merchaussee, and then you had pairing that with Farina, or even characters in that time period were changing their own HP. But now Merchaussee can be used on anyone. That was a 36% crit rate increase. Then Codex came along. Now it's 40%. And now you have taken away the need of a character, like going back to a character like Alhaitham, with you have to focus on crit, you have to focus on attack, you have to focus on EM, and you're trying to balance all of these plates. Whereas now you just have one of those like stats as almost like okay, I don't have to worry about that anymore because now I just have like a free given of so much XYZ help from an artifact set.
Merchaussee Hunter and Codex are so good for the community. You were talking about it earlier. People were delusional and would only ever build 70% crit rate and say, yeah, it's good enough. Because you don't pay attention to the numbers that don't crit.
We didn't have such big numbers that we didn't have 300% crit damage, right? So that's why. It was.
Well, it's those characters are more difficult to build with high crit rate, and it felt actively bad building high crit rate because you were literally seeing your numbers increase because you only pay attention to the non-crit.
Right. You don't look at clear times and stuff
By
like that.
trivializing crit rate, or at least making it easier to cap, you don't feel like you're penalizing yourself. I think those sets are actually very good for the game in that way, in the community.
Yeah, it's just fun.
Right.
Like, why? I don't want to have to deal with crit rate. No.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
lose 5% on my
People
monthly
still
damage
find a
bonus.
way to play 30 crit rate Nufalat.
Mm.
Because
But I think-
60% is good enough.
I mean, especially now bringing in cryo teams. I mean, now you've got the extra 15% from there. Now you have, once again, we're talking about the extra stat increases of just getting more makes our lives easier. So, yeah, okay. I mean, that's a pretty interesting and good way to kind of say it because now you're now focusing on actually enjoying the character rather than sitting there and feeling like you're saying, you're focusing on your numbers kind of decrease. Especially with a character that's hitting super fast or whatever, you're not having to worry about all those changes, I guess.
Yeah, that's another thing. Our characters weren't doing like 4 hits per rotation.
Correct.
The other big difference between Codex and Merchaussee is Codex's 2-piece is on all of your damage. Merchaussee's 2-piece is only on normal attack and attack. This seems like a small difference, but it actually really matters. And it makes Codex significantly better for the characters that can use it. That's why you don't see people using Merchaussee on any character that can use Codex. Because it's not just a 4% crit rate.
Well, yeah, and I remember I was figuring this out a while ago. This is a little while ago, but people were even talking about 4-piece Merchaussee with C1 Skirk and how that switched over because of that crit rate increase is now helping that extra charge attack buff, whereas her personal set doesn't actually help that. So it's actually going also back to looking at how well Merchaussee can actually be helping her that C1 hit that Skirk has as well, because her personal set doesn't actually help that charge attack hit that C1 comes from. So it's almost it's idiosyncrasies with each kit that kind of change these sets and therefore change how the game kind of works.
Yeah, like Farazan, even pre C6, you would just do Viridescent, but once you hit C6, you're gonna do Tenacity for your Xiao, because she can actually proc that.
Hmm.
It's just another example of like what you're talking about.
Well, the Skirk thing is funny. It's primarily that 60 damage bonus is not good enough compared to 36 crit rate. You need a set to be as good as the Varesa set. You want sets to have 100 damage bonus from now on, if they're only going to give damage bonus. That's like the primary thing.
They just kind of messed up with Skirk's set.
And even then, like, Long Night's Oath and the Plunge that aren't even that. Sorry, Long Night's Oath and Obsidian aren't even like that far behind.
No, they're not. Which is, just- it's like the ultimate example.
Yeah, they unironically could have just had 5.0 sets, Obsidian, Codex, and Scroll, and just didn't release a second set, and it literally wouldn't have done anything. Like these new
Nothing
sets
would have
they
changed.
decide to release in Natlan don't really impact at all. The Scroll and Obsidian Codex are just that strong.
I do
you're-
like the Skirk set for farming, because you can just
True.
walk in and burst. It's kind of nice.
Fontaine didn't really do anything like that either, right? It was Whimsy, which is incredibly, stuck to one character, and then Revere.
At least it was. I mean, at least it was good on those characters.
Reverie is
Yeah.
a set for no one.
I haven't
Oh well,
kept up. to be
there's
honest.
also the Nighttime Whisper set alongside
yeah.
Song of Days Past.
Whispers in the Echoing
Song of Days
Woods.
Past actually did. It's actually somewhat good. It's a
Yeah,
best.
Natlan actually skipped like an artifact
Yeah.
drop.
I think they
Yeah, like,
realized
we've
that they
only
kinda
got 2
should
right
have
now, and we're
moved
already at 5.7.
I mean,
So yeah.
We can talk about the
Mm.
sets from the end of Sumeru as well. Nymph's Dream and Vorokasha's Glow.
Yeah.
No, why
Vorokasha's
they
Glow
released
is a
those.
set that would be Yellow's best in slot if Farina's HP drain actually activated it,
No.
but it doesn't. They didn't think that far ahead. It could have been a good set.
If they only
It was
cared.
probably intentional, honestly.
I don't know about that.
I think so. No, I think they
It's
were
just
Yeah,
that
they
Farina's self-damage and Dia's self-damage are not implemented the same way.
Yeah, and the second set is for some reason designed for child for some odd reason.
When he already had.
You see,
his
look,
own-
Genshin's
designed
going
it
back to the older
correctly.
units.
Whenever
This
they
dream
acted-
doesn't have long enough stacks to be universally accepted as great on Tartaglia. If you compare Polar Star and Nymph's Dream, Polar Star has longer stack duration, which is why it's always good. This is like really nerdy. Sorry, but
And we could.
I don't know
kinda-
what they were cooking.
Yeah, we could look at that and be like, that was their attempt at buffing older characters with artifact sets and weapons.
Yeah,
and,
they did.
Like it wasn't good. Yeah.
The stream fell right on its face. That's why people still just used Heart of Depth. But I think overall, so
two piece.
Yeah, two piece.
or just two piece. So looking overall, I guess kind of just so for the audience to kind of grasp onto the idea, we've talked already about kind of everything now, fully looking at everything, which was should Genshin even do the idea, which was brought up with a lot of other games, a lot of other ideas, talking about kind of what actually is brought up with those other units. Constellation we talked about kind of what goes on with each of those different units and kind of how that actually can help or hurt. And then we kind of jumped over into the next part, which was looking at would you buff Genshin, like old Genshin characters, if kind of each of the people here really walked into Hoyo headquarters and they were to listen to us, would you actually, will Genshin, if you could kind of be a fly on the wall, would they actually do it? And we've seen some of the past, what they've done. We've talked about it throughout the entire video, how that has changed, whether that be through certain reactions to buff older elements by bringing a new element in. We've talked about how new units have been brought in, how reactions now have been changing or adding sub-reactions to an extent with something like Lunar in the future, and how possibly what that could bring. We've also looked at, if they were going to change, units, who would it be? We've went from way back in the day characters with like Archons. We've talked about Yoimiya. We've talked about a lot of different things. So I guess now to just wrap everything up, the question then comes to, now the audience. What do you guys think down below? You just let us know in the comments. What do you guys think, about the different questions we've kind of gone over, everything we've talked about. I mean, even the initial questions we've brought up, we've talked a lot about different things. So let us know, more or less what you guys would hope for in specifically this type of content. Would you guys be wanting more of certain characters buffed? Would you guys want more reactions? Would you guys want them to just correctly maybe bring in new reactions? Or I don't know, what are you guys actually thinking as well? So let us know down in the comments what you guys are looking for. And I guess that's kind of bringing our talk finally to a close. I do want to thank everyone for kind of joining in, and thank you to the viewers as well for watching.
Thank you for having us. I'm sorry, I feel like I
Thanks for having me.
way too much.
No,
Uh,
no, you're
Yeah,
good.
no, it's good. And once again,
We kind of
encourage-
derailed.
We definitely
And
derailed, but
that's-
it's fine.
I think
It's
that's like
fine.
a great thing, though. I think, this is something that the platform really, really does need and really kind of wants as well. We did derail, but I think hearing everybody's real thoughts and kind of pulling you guys maybe out of, just sitting down and maybe this is what I want to say. Now we're kind of actually getting into the nitty gritty of what you guys really think as well, is kind of helping, other people to see too that, we are just like everyone else. We're looking at things kind of in a different light as well and trying to pick things apart. So
I guess here's the question. Would it feel, or here's a question. If they buff specifically one character, let's say they buff Ganyu, but how would you feel if you play Ayaka? If Ayaka is completely untouched, but they buff Ganyu.
I just see it as I'll get my turn eventually.
But what if it never comes?
It
yeah,
will.
I was about
dude,
to say.
I'll be honest. Dokkan. All right. I haven't talked about Dokkan. They did 15 easy A's during their anniversary. That is 15 new entire kits basically they had to do from the ground up. They can design some extra, kits for Genshin. They only do one character or maybe two characters an update. They can do some more. That's all I gotta say. They could even do just basic buffs where it's like 400% attack. There you go. Take your buff. So, yeah.
I think with Genshin having so many characters, if they are going to actually change like a numerical value and just increase it, I think eventually like a lot of characters will be left in the dust that you could argue that they need a buff. And I think like Jstern said, it's hard to set a specific standard and like, oh, this character should get buffed because it's X percent behind, right? And it's pretty much going to be on popularity. Like we can just see from Honkai Star Rail, they pick Zhongli and then all Stellaron hunters, right? So, and then you could argue,
Kafka.
yeah, made her a complete support. Anyway, so characters will be left
Okay,
behind.
you didn't have to mention that.
Characters will inevitably be left behind. So it's if they are going to actually specifically buff a character,
Is it fair?
yeah, it's not going to
I
be
guess my
fair.
question.
And like
Some
how
other
they're going to
problems
choose the
that come along with
character,
it.
how they're going to choose the character who gets buff, it's kind of up to their discretion. Like I said, probably due to popularity. Now whether or not they do this, I think we discussed this a lot. We'll just have to see, but I do think that they're just going to continue on with releasing newer and newer stuff. It doesn't seem like any direct buffs will be on the way, like Constellations, whether it's Constellations base C0 buff. It's probably just going to be continued with newer characters, newer artifact sets, stronger characters that will benefit weaker characters. And while it is easier to do that, and it definitely helps a lot of characters, as we can see with Escoffier, I think the danger there is that, as we've mentioned already, if, like, for example, if we have more Escoffiers, more stronger supports, then it is like the team that I think also Jstern said this, where the team, like the best teams are kind of just locked. So you're just kicking out older supports.
Yeah, and I actually would agree with that. I think that Genshin's path, I think the path they just want to take, because there's no doubt they've thought about this in the studio before. I mean, their neighbor games are doing direct buffs to characters' kits and reworking kits, changing their scalings or whatever the case may be. With Genshin, I think in the trend's been, hey, we're gonna introduce this new character, kind of bring Chevreuse, Mika, you got your specific 4 stars that kind of help one particular character or something like that. Now we've got Escoffier, and I think that's just the trend they want to do. And I agree with you, Andad. I think they're just going to continue that and not directly give numerical buffs or change kits or something like that, unless it's a Zhongli incident or that one Nuvula incident that happened and they changed the thing within 24 hours. That also happened. That's the only way they're going to change an actual kit. I think that's just the path they want to take. But other than that, this has been a great talk, guys. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us on this. If you guys want, you can say bye to the viewers. And we had a lot of fun. This was a long talk, and it was so good to have you guys. Can't wait for what the future might have in
Thanks for
store
having
for
us.
future content. What's that, Flip?
I just said thanks for having us. Also, I waved.
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
can't
'Cause
see
we
it,
did.
Bro,
but
I can't
Yeah.
react to the wave.
We will wait
Where's the
for
react
you.
wave?
Add it in the edit. Just get like an emoji wave.
Kinda like,
Yeah.
All right.
You just slap
All
something
right.
on screen for you.
But yeah, thank you once
Thank
again,
you.
guys, for joining us, and thank you guys for watching.
Let's ignore everything we talked about. Pick one character to get a buff, and how do you buff them?
Okay. You want to go ahead and start us out? What's cooking in your brain?
Okay, so my favorite character is Hu Tao. I
You
would
know.
want normal attack +3. Hu Tao also has this HP conversion cap to attack. This cap actually decreases, as in like it becomes easier to hit with C3 currently.
Yeah.
They do this because the conversion increases, but the cap doesn't move. If you were curious, it's 7.15, which is her birthday. The conversion is the same number.
It's like it, Yansan. Right? Or it's
Is
opposite.
it like?
But
Oh, okay.
with C3, if you have Staff of Homa, any HP above 40k is significantly diminished in its value. I'd like this to not be the case. It's kind of archaic. There's no real reason to have a cap on it. Characters from 1.0, like Noelle, or even later, Ito, have similar stat conversions with no caps. Clean this up, please. What's the big deal?
Chlorant too. Like Chlorant has, I think it's her C2 increases her cap. Sorry, increases the scaling, but also increases the cap as well. So she doesn't into this issue.
Chlorant's cap is kind of still an issue.
Well,
It's
I didn't
kind
know
of a
Chlorant had a
problem with
cap.
Gansa.
That's also the first time I've said her name right in like 2 years. I normally call her Chloride.
Is that who you'd pick, Flip? Would you
no,
buff
Chlorant is
Chlorant?
good.
Okay, then who would you
I was
buff?
gonna say, tell that to Jello.
And how would you buff
Who
them?
would I buff? Okay, it would either be Raiden or it would be Venti. I can't think of buffs
You're
for
a
Venti.
traitor to Chlorant.
Chlorant doesn't need it. She's good enough. Raiden kind of. So Raiden or Venti. I think for Raiden, I can only think of things for Raiden. I can't think of things for Venti. I think Raiden kind of, instead of having her ER to damage bonus, I think it's is currently, it should have been somewhere like ER to crit, because it makes it. She's a character that has a nuke. Her
Oh, for
supposed
eight.
pairing was supposed to be Sora. I just think it would make sense if they gave her a crit rate for ER, and yeah, it would make her a lot more consistent. It'd make her way easier to build, and also just increasing her scaling too. Maybe making her a better battery, because it is still kind of awkward even with at Caesar at least, or without engulfing lightning. I don't know. There's a few things you could do. Just making her a better battery and giving her crit in her base kit.
Dang, you stole my riding because I wanted the riding buff. But
Oh, my bad.
oh, that's okay. Well, there are some things I wanted to add. Raiden C1 is just like increased resolve stacks, right? And but one of them is like for like increase for electro characters specifically. I mean, they could just make a baseline so that everyone contributes. But also, Mavuika also has fighting spirit generation, but how come her constellation also just gives her attack? Like, can we get a little bit more than that? And then on top of that, aside from numerical buffs, one of Raiden's like annoying things is that her coordinated attack just doesn't work against shields, and you just don't get energy or electro application, which is really annoying.
God, you're right.
Like, they could definitely just
Almeida
fix
needs
that.
this buff too, by the way.
That would be an example of like a character feeling much better to play and not necessarily a numerical buff. I think that would help the character a lot.
Well, Red Ward, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just figured out mine. It's Risley.
Ooh.
I love
Really?
I love the dude, and I love like how his voice actor. Oh, I'm not gonna go into the whole thing, but man, like the dude, he's so cool. but then the man is like so bad. I have C3R1, so like he's not bad at all. I can get him to do 3 million damage in a rotation. It's like 1.2 million from Mavuika, but don't talk about that. But like I don't know how I would buff him. I think if I was looking at him from a, how I normally look at characters, I would give him a C1, but then he's left with Widzith. I hate Widzith, right? So I'd give him a better 4-star weapon. Maybe I wouldn't hate it as much if I
Well,
didn't have to test with it, but
Floating Purity exists if you want a
I
less
don't know.
annoying Widzith.
I'm not down bad for my C301. I'm good.
Fair
But
enough.
I think I would just give him. I really don't know what I would give him. I think I just give him more damage on his fists before he does his charge, probably.
Oh, something I didn't even
Actual
mention
normal
is
attack damage.
the way characters generate
Yeah.
particles has changed. I'd like every character to get their particles up front, please.
If
Fury,
you're if,
I
you,
hated
if you're
Fury
from
so much for
Natlan,
that.
you instantly get 5.
Yeah.
Why did Mona's particles happens after her oh, it's so weird.
After her taunt pops.
She does her taunt. Yeah, after her
Right.
taunt pops, but she's off field by the time that happens. So her ER is just breaks for no reason.
Yeah.
Even Ganyu does 2 at the start when she casts her skill, and then 2 in a burst, which makes so much more.
Yeah, I found it really funny how when Escoffier beta was released, people were expecting 5 particles because that was the norm, and then just 4. Should have been from
No.
Natlan.
Anyway, TLDR, Risley should generate. I'd also like a cryo resonance buff for Risley.
Hmm?
So if you don't know how
for Mel-
cryo resonance works, it only
No,
buffs
Oh.
I know. That's
when
why I like
cryo resonance
Shenhe
is
and
on enemies.
Yeah.
So if you play Shenhe in a melt team, cryo doesn't have a resonance because you're melting. You're not actually getting that 15 crit rate unless
Keeping
the pyro
the-
character is melting.
Correct. Yeah. You're not able to keep the application on without actually.
Well, there
making
is no
sure you're-
application. There's no
Well,
cryo aura.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So you can't actually even have anything on the enemy.
Cryo resonance buff,
Rift.
please. It
Yeah.
would also
yeah,
make
for me-
calculating so much easier, so people don't have 20 different results for skirt teams.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
Yep.
For me, since no one had said it, I'm actually surprised no one brought it up because I know some of you agree with this because it was brought up. But Venti is going to be my pick, and it's a simple change I would do, because he can already, he has the crowd control. That's what people will bring up. He's like, well, he's got the crowd control, that he's still superior, and yes, that is true. So what I would like to see in Venti, and I'll just say it. What I would like to see in Venti is a lot of damage increase for his burst from off field, because what we really don't have solid, at least in the Animo roster in general, is a solid off field damage dealer. The closest thing we have to things like that are going to be Cosmo Sucrose, Lynette, the other off fielders, Lanyan, Farza. They're not heavy on damage, and even Lynette, Sucrose aren't dishing out a lot of damage. Kazuha has some, but it's only when you skill, and some of the burst hit. It's there, but if we could see actual good damage numbers out of Venti from off field to put him on a level of Chiori, Emily, I guess Escoffier now, make him the premier Animo sub DPS from off field, and that's his thing.
I was gonna say, make him
That's
place
really
his
cool.
burst on the ground where his feet are.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
could you make it
lower it a little
lower?
bit.
And I could have thrown a little side tangent in there, please. Just they kind of nerfed him in. Maybe they did it on purpose. Maybe they didn't. He can't pull in bigger enemies, therefore making grouping larger enemies also a bit of an annoyance, and practically therefore making his.
It would be
grouping
funny if he
effect
could, and that's part
useless.
of the buff.
So if he
he's
could
the
at least
Animarch, he's
pull
gotta
them,
be able
he
to.
doesn't have to pull them in the air, but if we could just get a little bit of a, I don't know, just a little bit more for grouping aspect.
One of the reasons Kazuha's
He-
grouping
Venti
is so
can pull
useful
Okay.
is because it is where he is standing. You can perfectly aim Kazuha's targeting.
Mhm.
There's no guesswork involved, and there's no enemy spacing involved. This is
Yeah,
a
maybe that's
really
why I like
simple and
damage
fundamental thing that would instantly make Venti feel better.
Yeah, remember the casual player thing? Venti and Ayaka. I can't. No. I can't, man. I ate him. I missed
I
the
think-
entire burst.
If I had to, I guess, buff a character, I mean, it's just one of my favorite characters. This is why. But we've talked about him as a character that has had other characters that have buffed him, and that would be Xiao. I think I would love to see Xiao actually be a strong character again. He's already been given everything he needs outside of his kit. Issues that I've seen with him as a personal fan of him that's, I mean, bled and died through his entire artifact, through changes, through perfecting everything about him. The issue comes in with Constellations. I mean, his Constellations, his first one just gives you an extra charge of his skill, which only becomes useful when you get to the C6. The C2 and the C4 feel like you're not getting really anything. And, you know, the skill upgrade in that other constellation is useless. And I feel like if we went back to what you were talking about, Jstern, and adding maybe a, like you were talking about with like Zenless, how they add multiple levels to all the different talents, that would be helpful for him. And also with, I don't know, maybe just also when he's in his burst state, could we please allow him to get energy? Because when he's in his burst state and he can't get energy, it makes using him so much more difficult, because you have to rely on every other character running Fav, which is possibly a damage loss for those characters, or just a straight, you know, buff loss for Xiao and those other characters.
Just to nitpick a tiny bit, he does get energy. He just doesn't generate particles when he's still.
Well, yeah, that's what I meant. I mean, he can get energy from the other units, but I mean specifically like creating particles himself.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
then you're
You're,
only
you're forced to
banking on,
funnel.
like,
You're forced to funnel.
correct. You're forced, like I was saying, you're forced to kind of run Fav on other units. For instance, with Sean Yun or something, you could possibly try to do that. Force her to run Fav instead of her personal weapon, which buffs plunge damage. So you're losing that buff, but you're getting your burst back, which is allowing for smoother rotations, which is technically helping damage faster, kind of. So that's what I would change if I was to kind of rework Xiao.
Well, it's most Farzan gives particles. Farzan C6 gives particles over time. That's part of the particles up front versus particles over time thing. You see this with characters like Gaming, where if you end the chamber mid burst, you simply just
It's
cannot
over.
burst next chamber.
We should put that in the Raiden rework.
This is also a Raiden issue.
Yeah. A lot of these
Both are the same
burst
thing, yeah.
This,
really late.
this is also a
burst onto characters.
Shillin, Mavuika without Shillin initiative.
Well,
Kind
go
of.
without Shilinen, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I don't like Eon-san as her best team. Don't. Good.
I don't know exactly how you fix that though. It's kind of fundamental.
6.0 Mavuika
burst
buff, 200 Night
characters.
Soul character.
Unless they make every character have no energy now.
Yeah.
You could just make like multiple hits for Raiden, like on multiple enemies. You could just generate twice the amount of energy, maybe.
Just make her generate all the energy she needs to with her first slash. That would be nice. Because
then all you have
sometimes
to
you do
worry
have
about
to
is the
swap off
cooldown.
early.
Have it
That
work
also
like
buffs
Genshin,
Raiden
where
as a
it's
support.
refunds.
Yeah. She could actually be a quick swap unit.
There's a lot of different changes. Some interesting. I wasn't
There's so much you
expecting.
could do, yeah.
Yeah, especially with these characters. There's a lot of bursts. It feels like, especially that we've talked about, that need more help than most things. It looks like. Once again, just those older units that are worked back then, but now it seems with all the new units changes things.
Yeah, they've definitely thrown away the energy gimmick, I feel like, with the newer characters.
It's really frustrating because the new game mode starts you with 0 energy.
Yeah.
So the new
that's-
characters are automatically.
That's what I was thinking about too, actually, while y'all were
Oh, I
discussing.
wasn't speaking about that. I
all
was
that.
speaking about even like
Yeah.
Kanich and Mulani. They don't have much like energy requirements.
Yeah.
If you're running Kanich with Emily, you know, she'll generate energy.
Wow.
But the whole thing over time again.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think
we-
that'll
we've
be
seen
kind of a
elements of
talking
skill
point with
Stance characters. So
that
it's-
game mode, and that's a different topic.
Well, I
but,
mean,
like,
both Mulani and Kanich want their elemental burst. I'm just saying it's nowhere near as hard to get as comparatively to like older characters.
Hmm,
mhm.
maybe.
Because like Shangling, Xingqiu, you basically had to build those guys with their main stat being energy recharge.
Well, those characters are their bursts.
Yeah.
Other
It's
characters are
very
burst.
ancillary for Kenichi and Mulan.